All right, good evening. It's good to see all of you. We welcome you here to Plaskute Church of Christ, our midweek Bible study, and we certainly welcome those that are online that might be joining us via Facebook or even perhaps YouTube. A couple of prayer requests here. Randy Britton is scheduled for bladder cancer surgery tomorrow at Murray Regional Hospital. And I'm planning to call him after the service tonight and chat with him a little bit and have a prayer over the phone. Sarah Sockwell, this is the wife of Peyton Sockwell and daughter-in-law of Chris and Jeanette Sockwell. I think most of us recall that she recently had surgery and treatment for complications and infection after suffering a ruptured appendix. And she is expecting a baby in February. She was sent home on bed rest, and then yesterday she was taken back to Vanderbilt UMC with persistent pain in her right side, and she was diagnosed with an abscess as of this morning, even afternoon. The thought was that she was going to have surgery again, but I got a call from Chris, and they have decided on second thought to treat it with antibiotics. And she was released from the hospital and sent home. So that, started with some bad news there, and then it sounds like that's all around a better situation. We want to extend Christian love and sympathy to the family of Betty Chapman. Betty was the aunt of Theresa Brown and Pam Holt and the cousin-in-law of Ken Reedy. The visitation will be tomorrow evening from 4 until 7 p.m. at Neal Funeral Home, and then the funeral will be held at 2 p.m. on Friday, December the 16th, also at Neal Funeral Home. We also want to extend Christian love and sympathy to the family of Jerry Jenkins. Jerry was the brother-in-law of Mike Hughes. He was the husband of Mike's sister, Linda Jenkins, and he was the uncle of Jeffrey Hughes and Patrick Hughes. The visitation is going to be from 11 until 1 p.m. on Saturday, December 17th, this Saturday at Center Hill Church of Christ, and then the funeral is scheduled to begin at 1 o'clock p.m. with burial to follow in the Center Hill Church of Christ Cemetery. So that'll be this Saturday. A few reminders. This Sunday, December the 18th, we will be meeting for feast at 5:30 p.m. in the Fellowship Building, as usual there. That'll be, I guess, our last feast of 2022. The deadline to sign up and turn in your money for CYC will be next Wednesday, December the 21st. If you haven't already seen this, the community Christmas breakfast will not be taking place on Christmas Eve, December 24th, that Saturday, but actually on Christmas morning. In lieu of our classes that morning, we're going to meet at 9 o'clock. We'll be serving breakfast until about 10 so that we can start getting things cleaned up and get everybody over here by 10:30 for our worship service. So you can encourage people you might invite to this to share that breakfast with us, and then to come over for our service, our worship service there on Christmas Day. Our first breakfast Bible study of 2023 will take place on Monday, January the 9th at 6:45 a.m. over here in the Fellowship Building. This will be for all lions, lambs, and their families. If you plan to attend, you're going to want to sign up on the sheet down front here, and that way we can make sure that enough food will be provided. Okay? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy.
We good? On those breakfast Bible studies, the rest of those throughout the year are going to be for just the lions. But similar to what we did last year, we want to have one that is for all age groups and their families. I get it, in the mornings it's difficult. A lot of you have got work. starting before we will even be meeting, which is 6:45 a.m. on January the 9th. Or you might have kids going to 3 different locations, and you've got, just the situation with that of drop-offs and things like that. But if you can get there, Monday, January the 9th, look forward to that time together. One other thing that has... The Lions Christmas party that was scheduled for this Saturday is going to be postponed. We are going to be traveling to Illinois, leaving as soon as school's out Friday to be able to go see Katie's family, and so we're going to have to postpone that. And it's probably going to be January, just be honest, with everything else that's going on in December. So we'll find a time and hopefully be able to get that done while school is out. But we'll figure it out, and we'll let you know when that is going to take place. I know that some of your classes, we just got really hot. I know that some of your classes have been looking over and studying the temple, right? Raise your hand if you've learned anything about the temple in recent weeks in Bible class. So like 2 of you. So can I just assume that the rest of you have just tabernacle? Okay, sorry, tabernacle. Yes, tabernacle. All right, so you've learned some things about the tabernacle. Well, then I was mistaken. I had temple in my mind. But that makes sense that it's not temple yet, because that's not till Solomon gets around, and you're not there yet, right? Anyway. I got some temple questions for you. You ready? But they're not temple questions you would have gone over, because these are New Testament temple questions. Jesus is able to go to a temple, and we read about the first visit that he makes to the temple that we read about. How old was Jesus? How old? 12. That's right. He's 12 years old. And Luke chapter 2 gives us a lot of details about that, and we find out that Jesus is really enjoying his stay at the temple. So much so that he doesn't leave with his family when they leave. How long was it before his family realized that Jesus was missing? All right? Keegan. No, not 3 days. Not 4 days. Anybody who remembers, how long was it before his family realized? What you got? Not 1 year. That'd have been a really long, What you got? 5? No, not 5. Amelia. No, not 2. We're getting closer. 1 day. They had already traveled an entire day. They realized Jesus isn't with them. Okay? So whether that was a situation where they're like, it's a big party of them traveling and they don't see him and figure he's somewhere. Anyway, they find out Jesus isn't with them. They go back. So if we use the logic that would say that it takes them just as long to get back to Jerusalem as it had taken them to travel as far as they had, how long has it now been since they've seen Jesus? A couple of days, right? And where did they find him? Got several hands up. Where was Jesus? In the temple. Tabernacle, we still got that. He was in the temple. Of course, he was talking with the Jewish scholars of the day, and they were marveling at his ability to answer questions. But we see a snippet of the preteen life of Jesus in the book of Luke in chapter 2. It's a really, really neat account there, because we have almost nothing between Jesus' birth and some things that happened in the first couple of years, and then when Jesus begins his earthly ministry around the age of 30. But we've got Luke chapter 2 that tells us a lot about Jesus. And in Luke chapter 2 in verse 52, which is probably the most well-known verse from all of that chapter, it tells us that Jesus grew in a few different ways, okay? Does anybody remember one of the ways that he grew? I wasn't going to ask that, but okay? One way, just one way. He grows in 4 separate ways. Well, okay. 4 separate ways. He grows in wisdom. That's one of them. Wisdom. And if you're 12, what's going to happen to your body? Is it going to stay the same size? Probably not. He's going to grow in stature. That's the wording that's used in a lot of our common translations. And he's going to grow in 2 other ways. He's going to grow in favor with God spiritually, but he's also going to grow in favor with man. So he is going to find a way to improve his relationship with God, and he is going to, from the age of 12, as he gets older, find a way to improve his relationship with his fellow man. Some really good examples for us to follow from the 12-year-old Jesus. Be dedicated to God's places and God's will. Seek to learn more about it. Become more wise, and that happens through things that we face in life. You don't have to keep growing in stature once you're at a certain age, but that's beyond your control to some extent, especially for you youngins. You're going to grow, hopefully. But get to know God better. Improve your relationship with Him. Get to know your fellow man better. Improve your relationship with them. We didn't sing songs tonight. It's time to go to class.
All right. I had the unenviable task of taking all three of my children to get their teeth cleaned this afternoon. I'd hoped that they would have a team ready to take each of them all at the same time and knock out that thing so we could get in there and get out. It did not work out that way. A single hygienist had to take them each in turn. And, don't tell my retired dental hygienist mama, but all kid walked away with at least one cavity. So we got to remedy that situation, I think in February. In fact, I think I scheduled their wonderful time on Valentine's Day, on that Wednesday. So it's first option I had after January. I'd say, the holiday feel is in full swing for some of you, especially if you got kids. You might have had to make it to a program or two this week, or what felt like 30 of them. And preschool had their program. LPS, I know, had their program at the theater. It's just a lot of trying to find a place to park and sometimes a place to sit. But it was good. And the kids are going to be getting out in about a day and a half. Brent, I feel like your child is riveted right now. Yeah, she is. Okay. But I thought, I decided that for our last 3 Wednesday nights of this year that I wanted to bring back a series I did about 3 years ago, because it's material that's certainly relevant during this time of the year, but as I'll sort of argue along the way, these are principles and things that serve us well throughout the year. It's just these are things that kind of get intensified during the holidays. And so along the way, you might go, oh, I kind of remember that point. I will say is here is a series that I myself prepared, and I do remember putting a lot of time in on it, so it'd be a shame just to present it once and never again. But two, I was like, man, that was a good point. I forgot that somewhere along the way, it's amazing how much you forget in 3 years, and some of you are like, I'm still trying to remember what you said last Sunday, or whatnot. But the holiday season is a mixed bag for most people. There's excitement and there's exhaustion, There's the hallelujah and there's the humbug. It can be stressful as well as sensational. And it's, an amalgamation of emotions and expectations. The most wonderful time of the year is often the hardest time of the year for many people for all kinds of reasons. The holidays, if we're being honest, can be very difficult for folks. And so we're gonna do this little 3-part series because there are certain challenges or difficulties that are especially intensified during this time. Take finances, for instance. Money is an ongoing concern for most people, and a lot of families are tempted to make some really bad decisions with their money this time of year that's going to cost them even going into the new year. Then what about family? I mean, we've all got those family members we can't wait to see, but perhaps some of us have those family members that we would like to avoid. The holidays bring us in close proximity with family members who are perhaps generous with their criticisms and stingy with their compliments, perhaps. Folks that are perhaps a bit difficult to deal with. And then what about funerals? What about those people who will not be in the Christmas family photo this year? Right? Grief and sorrow grip many people during this time. Okay, it's just what happens. Because this is a time where I think we're getting pretty good downpour right now, y'all. Okay, it sounds like it's coming through the baptistry back here. But those are kind of the 3 areas that we're gonna focus in on. And my goal is to filter these difficulties or these challenges through the lens of Scripture, biblical teaching and principles, as well as experience, to provide us with a healthy perspective or some solutions along the way. How would Jesus want us to respond to these issues or deal with these realities? And so that's what we're gonna try to do. And the first thing that we're gonna need to do to, survive the holidays is to give yourself the gift of margin. And now notice, it is not margarine, right? The last thing I need this holiday season is some more lard or butter, right? No, thank you. But all of us could use, I think, some margin. So how do we get out of the craziness of our busy, hurried, and frantic schedules, that sense of being overwhelmed that's often a reality for people during this time, that sense of being at our wits' end? How do we deal with it? Now, I think we'd all admit that being stressed out is sometimes because of circumstances beyond our control. But I think we can all admit, if we're being honest with ourselves, that sometimes we're stressed out because of some decisions we've made, and some of
some of the things that we're trying to accomplish, maybe trying to accomplish too much in too little time, right? There's time issues, there's financial issues, there's relationship issues, and we often bring stress upon ourselves. Many families are really good at spreading themselves too thin during the holiday season. And then maybe we've come to believe, well, that's just the price you have to pay, to have a good holiday season. But I think it's worth discussing the need for margin. Let's get a kind of a definition, and this is a good one, I think, one that's really, really helpful. Margin is the space between our limit and our load. The space between our limit and our load. It's the difference between the limit that we can handle and the load that we've got. And when they are one and the same, we have no margin, right? If my limit's here and my load's here, that's a good situation. I got some what? I got some margin, right? If my load is even with my limit or what? Exceeding it. You might say, well, we got some margin there. No, it's not margin, all right? That's what we call redlining, And here's the funny thing. Our sort of capacity meter is not like the gas gauge on our car. It's kind of more like the idiot light, that just starts saying, hey, something's wrong. You'd like to be kind of cool if we had this way to tap into a gas gauge and okay, all right, so my limit's here, my load's here, we're still good. Like some sort of visible, we push a button and it's like, here, Jacob, here's your limit, here's your load. We don't really, what we get though is we start sort of freaking out or getting overwhelmed, and it's kind of like the idiot light on our car that's just, hey, you're overheating this thing, right? You're trying to do way too much, and your body begins to kind of react negatively, whether that's emotionally or physically, right? Mentally, and we all of a sudden are like, well, how did I get here? Well, how did I manage to exceed my limit here? Have you ever had a panic attack? Anybody ever had a panic attack or an anxiety attack? One thing we can say about them is they're the worst, right? And they kind of, in some sense, at least the intensity of them kind of comes out of nowhere. And a lot of people that have had these kinds of attacks, you know what they think's happening, don't you? They think they're having a heart attack, and they think they're on their way out. I mean, they're scared to death, which does what? Only adds fuel to the panic attack or the anxiety attack. Many times, not going to say always, sometimes there's other things afoot here. Many times these panic attacks happen when we allow our load to exceed our limit. And let me just say here, Jesus doesn't want you having panic attacks. Can we agree on that? You're like, well, show me the book, chapter, and verse. Listen, if Jesus loves you, and I have a reason to believe that he does, I have some good reasons to believe that he does, he doesn't want you having panic attacks, right? He doesn't want us redlining our lives all the time. Our culture idolizes people who run at max capacity. Our culture adores people who are always redlining. But weariness is not something we should be proud of. Now, you could say in some context, let's say let's say that you're an athlete who's been expending himself for 4 quarters, and you dig deep to finish the game strong, okay? That's weariness, perhaps something to be proud of there. Or maybe if you're a runner who digs deep to finish the last 5 miles of a marathon. Or you're a soldier who's dog-tired, but you find the strength to finish the mission. In those cases, weariness is probably something to be proud of. But to live our lives as if we are living in those situations day to day to day is not something that we should be proud of. In fact, it's something we should be scared of. Because we're probably redlining. And see, you could redline a car for a while, but can you redline a car forever? What's going to happen? You guys know what's going to happen. It's going to break down. And we're not that much different when it comes to this. As followers of Christ, we have to be countercultural here. Let me give you some things that kind of highlight the importance of margin in our life. One, they provide us with a long filter. Have you ever noticed that when you're stressed out, you say things, mean things, snarky things that you would probably not normally say? Have you ever noticed that about yourself? When you're spread really thin and you feel like you're juggling just a bit too much, okay? Have you noticed that your filter gets very thin too? Where you just don't communicate with those around you like you probably should, right? It happens to me, I'd like to think I'm not weird here. I like to think I've got some others of you who are like, what you're saying right now is true to experience. And you can often tell, right? You think kids can tell when their parents are stressed out? Yeah. And they can tell it just by what you're saying and how you're saying it. They can just tell. Mom's, load has exceeded her limit today, and I might have, attributed to that. Another thing, margin keeps us from hitting the wall. When you don't live with margin, everything's harder. What about a letter that's written from top to bottom and side to side with no margins? That's going to give me a migraine headache trying to read that. It's like I need some white space. I take a little breather, if it's just loaded like that. Same thing if you have no white space in your life. The white space is going to give you room to breathe and to contemplate and make good decisions, respond appropriately to things. But when you've got no margin, you will eventually hit the wall, and when you hit the wall, it's going to be kind of ugly. And a third thing, they leave room for crisis and opportunity. Crises and opportunities are both inevitable. But if we don't have margin, then when a crisis raises its ugly head, it's probably going to bring us down. Because we feel like, what? We got nothing. We got no resources here to deal with this crisis because we've been juggling things, right? Redlining, and then you're going to throw a crisis on top of that. How are we supposed to deal with that? Well, what happens is we try to deal with it, and we don't deal with it really well. And opportunities. If you got no margin in your life, and a good opportunity presents itself, it's going to be hard for you to seize that opportunity because you're just preoccupied with so much else, right? And neither a crisis nor an opportunity send us a text message to let us know when they're coming. They don't. so that we can kind of plan for them and clear our schedules. You notice that? Crisis doesn't happen. These things don't happen necessarily conveniently, but maybe if we're living with some margin in our lives, we can be ready for those things when they do happen. A couple of things just we can take from the life of Jesus and even his teaching. This is our master on margins. Jesus doesn't want us stressed out. You might recall in Mark chapter 6, Jesus listens as his apostles debriefed him, on all that they had been doing for the kingdom. They'd been helping people, they had been doing good things, they had been teaching people. But I want you to notice what Jesus doesn't do. Jesus doesn't say, guys, that's great, get right back out there, let's be sure to burn the candle at both ends. You guys can do more. You know what he does in Mark chapter 6, 31 and 32? He says, all right, it's time for us to get away by ourselves. You guys haven't even had time to eat. It's time for some leisure, right? It's time for us to go rest. There are people, and honestly, I can be one of those people where I'm like, hey, it's time to shut down, but it's like giving myself permission to shut down is hard, because I'm like, oh, I don't need to be wasting a second, I need to be doing something. There's people to call, there's people to visit, there's a sermon to write, there's a lesson to read, there's a book to read, there's all this I got to do, And I love that Jesus talks to these guys and says, what? You guys need some margin. You can't just be doing this all the time and not think it's not going to have a negative effect on your life. It's interesting. Richard Foster observed, our adversary majors in three things: noise, hurry, and crowds. He says, and if he can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, he will be well satisfied. I think there's some truth to that. Here's another thing, Jesus wants us to learn to say no to the less important things. How many of you have an issue with saying no? A little personal story on my front. When I was in middle school, probably at some point, I remembered that at that time the church here hired a 29-year-old David Stoffel to be our youth minister, and he was listen, if you know David, he's an intense guy, right? But he taught us a lot of songs.